The mystery of Pine Hollow Woods. This memory has been heavy on my mind lately. With my youngest son, Eric, now off to college, the house feels quieter than it ever has before. Too quiet, if I'm being honest. It's funny how, when your kids are young, you long for peace and quiet, but when it finally arrives, it's far from comforting. Before leaving the house, it's just the two of us here. Eric's departure stirred something in me, unlocking memories I hadn't thought about in years. People say it's normal to reminisce about your kid's childhood during times like this, but there's one memory in particular that keeps resurfacing. A memory that's far from sunshine and rainbows. Eric was 8 years old when it happened, and even now, I can't make full sense of it. Life can be tough on so many fronts, and nothing can be harder than the business world. I've always been a hands-on kind of guy. As a carpenter by trade, I've built countless things over the years, but nothing brought me more pride than the treehouse I built for Eric in our backyard. It wasn't just a simple platform nailed to a tree. I poured my heart into it. It had sturdy walls, a shingled roof, and a proper wooden ladder leading up to the entrance. It was an extension of our home, a place where Eric could let his imagination run wild. My wife Lisa wasn't thrilled at first. She worried it was too high off the ground and unsafe, but I argued that it was safer than Eric climbing trees on his own. He'd always been a climber, and I figured a sturdy treehouse with a ladder was a better option. Eventually, she came around, and Eric absolutely loved it. Our house was at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in Pine Hollow, surrounded by woods that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was one of the things Lisa and I loved most about the property when we first bought it. The backyard bordered the forest, giving us privacy and a peaceful escape from the world. Friends and family often joked about how hard it was to find our place, nestled away at the edge of civilization. The treehouse was perfectly positioned at the edge of the yard, where I could see it clearly from our bedroom window. I wanted to keep an eye on Eric while he played, just in case he hurt himself. From the window, I couldn't see inside the treehouse, but I had a perfect view of the ladder and the surrounding area. For a while, everything was normal. Eric loved his treehouse, and I often saw him climbing up with toys or books in hand. He was the kind of kid who preferred playing on his own, especially since his older brother Adam had outgrown the treehouse phase. One day, Eric started talking about an imaginary friend named Jake. Lisa and I weren't too concerned at first. Kids often have imaginary friends, and while Eric was a little older than most, it didn't seem too strange. Lisa thought it was cute, but I was a bit more skeptical. Eric had never shown much interest in imaginary friends before, so it struck me as odd. Still, I didn't think too much of it. What did concern us was how much time Eric began spending in the treehouse. He stopped bringing toys up there and started spending hours alone talking to Jake. I asked him about it once, and his response was unsettling. He said Jake was shy and didn't like being talked about. "Why does Jake only like the treehouse?" I asked. Eric shrugged. "He doesn't like coming inside. He says he feels safer up there." Chemical drugs were present, and they scared the hell out of him. That answer gave me pause. Wasn't the point of an imaginary friend that they went wherever you wanted them to? Later that night, I looked up articles about kids and imaginary friends. Some kids apparently do have specific places where they prefer to play with their imaginary friends, so I chalked it up to that. Lisa, however, remained uneasy. She thought Eric was taking things too far, and I couldn't entirely disagree. We were the kind of parents who let our kids explore. Eric often played with the neighborhood kids, riding bikes and playing tag until the sun went down. They were all good kids, and we trusted Eric to stay out of trouble. That's why it was such a shock when Eric came home one Saturday with a black eye. "What happened?" I asked as I cleaned him up. He looked down at the floor and didn't answer. "Eric, you need to tell me. Did one of the kids hit you?" Finally he muttered, "Jake got mad at me." Froze. "Jake? You mean your imaginary friend?" He nodded. I told him I didn't want to go with him, and he got mad. I didn't know what to say. Lisa and I were convinced he had gotten into a fight with another kid and didn't want to admit it. Lisa suggested taking down the treehouse, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I told her I'd talk to Eric and set boundaries. That night, Eric refused to come out of his room or talk to me. The next day, I decided to investigate the treehouse myself. When I climbed up, what I found made my stomach churn. Scattered around the floor were dirty children's socks and shoes. None of them belonged to Eric or Adam. There were also food wrappers, empty bags, and even a couple of dirty plates. The walls were covered in pencil drawings of animals, a fox, a bear, and deer, among others. One drawing stood out, a massive spider with a face scribbled over in black pencil. It was unsettling, to say the least. When I confronted Eric about it, he said Jake needed food and sometimes forgot his shoes. That was the last straw. I forbade Eric from going into the treehouse again. Lisa and I even considered consulting a child psychologist, but before we could, something happened that changed everything. One evening, I was looking out the bedroom window when I noticed movement near the treehouse. At first, I assumed it was Eric disobeying me, but as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't him. A frail, sickly-looking boy was climbing down the ladder. He was dirty, his clothes tattered, and he moved with a strange, jerky gait. I ran outside, yelling for him to stop, but as soon as I opened the door, he bolted into the woods. I chased after him, but he was impossibly fast. Within seconds, he vanished into the trees. Lisa and I called the police, who searched the woods thoroughly but found nothing. None of the neighborhood kids were missing, and no reports of missing children matched the boy's description. With our permission, the police questioned Eric. What he told them sent chills down my spine. He said Jake claimed to be a magic boy who lived in the woods with his animal friends, whom he called Bear, Fox, and others. Jake had been trying to convince Eric to leave his family and join him in the woods. When Eric refused, Jake would get angry and make strange noises. The police conducted a more extensive search of the woods but found nothing. No signs of anyone living there, no evidence of Jake or his so-called friends. We never saw Jake again after that. Lisa, ever superstitious, believes Jake wasn't human, that he was something otherworldly. I'm not a believer in the paranormal, but I can't shake the unsettling feeling when I think about that boy in the woods. Was he real, or was he something else entirely? The treehouse still stands in our backyard, weathered and unused. Every time I look at it, I can't help but wonder if Jake is still out there, waiting for another child to befriend. The Haunting of Cedar Hollow. When I was about 9 or 10, my life changed in ways I couldn't have imagined. My dad got a prestigious new job that required us to move from our modest home in rural Kentucky to the affluent suburb of Cedar Hollow, Maryland. The move happened so quickly it felt like a whirlwind. Within a month, our family went from a small, weathered house surrounded by cornfields to a sprawling, picturesque property in one of Maryland's most sought-after neighborhoods. My parents were ecstatic about the move. It wasn't just the new job or the upscale home. They saw this as a fresh start for all of us, especially for me. At the time, I was a shy, awkward kid with few friends, content to spend my days with books or wandering the quiet fields near our old house. My parents hoped that Cedar Hollow would bring me out of my shell. In hindsight, I wish they hadn't been so optimistic. Our new house was incredible. It was a massive colonial-style home with tall white pillars and perfectly trimmed hedges. The backyard stretched into a thick grove of oak and maple trees, providing both shade and an air of mystery. My brothers, Liam and Carter, were just as awestruck as I was, but the highlight for all of us was the treehouse. Calling it a treehouse felt almost insulting. It was more like a tree fortress, expertly built across a network of 6 or 7 large oaks at the far end of the backyard. The structure had multiple levels, sturdy railings, and even windows. It looked like something out of a storybook, and it instantly became our favorite place to play. The treehouse adventures begin. At first, the treehouse was a shared wonderland. Liam, who was 13 and the oldest, declared himself the Tree King, while 11-year-old Carter claimed the title of Commander of the Woods. I was relegated to Scout, which meant I spent most of my time doing whatever tasks they assigned me. Despite the sibling hierarchy, we had fun. We played everything from hide-and-seek to elaborate games of pretend involving knights, pirates, and secret agents. But as the weeks went by, Liam and Carter's interest in the treehouse began to fade. They started spending more time with their new friends from school, leaving me as the sole occupant of the treehouse. At first, I felt abandoned. I tried everything to lure them back, promising new games, building makeshift traps, and even bringing snacks. Nothing worked. Eventually, I came to accept that the treehouse was mine and mine alone. The first note. One crisp autumn afternoon, I climbed up into the treehouse after school. I loved the quietness of it, the way the golden sunlight filtered through the leaves. But that day, something was different. On the small wooden table in the corner of the treehouse, there was a folded piece of paper that hadn't been there before. Curious, I picked it up and unfolded it. The note was written in neat looping handwriting that reminded me of a child's. It said, "Liquefy. Hello, I'm the Marshmallow Man. It's nice to meet you. What's your name?" At first, I was delighted. I assumed one of my brothers had left it as a way to reignite their interest in the treehouse. Excited, I grabbed a piece of paper and a marker from the supplies we kept up there and wrote back, "Hi Marshmallow Man, my name is Max. Do you want to play?" I left my reply on the table and ran back to the house, grinning. That night I wanted to ask Liam or Carter if they were behind the note, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to ruin the game. The next day I raced to the treehouse after school. Sure enough, there was a new note waiting for me. Repro. I wrote of your book. I saw people listening to their own emotions, raising themselves to another level by being able to express themselves openly. What's your favorite? It's Beatrice in Texas. I felt a thrill of excitement. Over the next several days, the notes continued. The Marshmallow Man asked me questions about my favorite games, my favorite snacks, and what I liked to do after school. It felt like having a pen pal, and I eagerly wrote back each time. The questions turned personal. After about a week, the tone of the notes began to change. The questions became more specific, more personal. One note asked, "What time do you usually play outside?" Another said, "What's your favorite place to hide in the treehouse?" I still didn't suspect anything sinister. I thought it was just Liam or Carter trying to make the game more interesting. But then I found a note that made me pause. It asked, "Which window is your bedroom?" I remember feeling a flicker of unease. Why would one of my brothers ask that? But I dismissed the thought and wrote back, pointing out the window on the second floor that faced the backyard. It seemed harmless enough at the time. "Oh, I promise I won't ask again. You know I wouldn't. And I'm so happy for you." The next note, however, made my stomach churn. It said, "What do your pajamas smell like?" I stared at the paper, my hands shaking. Something about the question felt wrong, deeply wrong. I ran back to the house and confronted Liam and Carter. They both looked genuinely confused when I demanded to know who the Marshmallow Man was. "Maybe it's a ghost," Liam joked, laughing. Carter joined in, teasing me for still playing make-believe. Their reactions only made me angrier. One of them had to be lying, but I couldn't figure out who. The tapping at the window. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the notes. Around midnight, I heard it, a faint tapping at my bedroom window. My heart stopped. It was a light, rhythmic sound, like someone gently knocking on the glass. I froze, pulling the covers over my head. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. After what felt like an eternity, the sound stopped. The next morning, I cautiously pulled back the curtains. My breath caught in my throat. Taped to the outside of the glass were marshmallows, arranged in the shape of a smiley face. My stomach turned. This wasn't a game anymore. The man at the window. Determined to catch whoever was behind the marshmallows, I stayed awake the following night. Around midnight, the tapping started again. My heart raced as I jumped out of bed and yanked the curtains open. Standing on the other side of the glass was a man. He had yellowing teeth, patchy hair, and eyes that gleamed with a sickly light. His smile widened when he saw me, revealing gums that looked raw and swollen. I screamed, louder than I ever had in my life. My parents burst into the room moments later, but by the time they looked out the window, the man was gone. The police were called immediately. They searched the yard, the treehouse, and the surrounding woods, but found no trace of the man. The notes were taken as evidence, but the officers seemed skeptical when I told them about the Marshmallow Man. My parents were terrified. They forbade me from ever going back to the treehouse, and I didn't argue. I couldn't even look at it without feeling a knot of fear in my stomach. Over the years, the memory of the Marshmallow Man has haunted me. My parents still live in that house, and the treehouse still stands at the edge of the yard, weathered but intact. Every time I visit, I catch myself glancing at it, half expecting to see a note waiting for me or a shadowy figure lurking among the trees. Some mysteries are better left unsolved.